All right, I think we'll get started. Um, my name is Patricia Fan Butenev. I'm the president and founder of Oxia Women. I want to thank you all for joining us this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever you are. Oxia Women is a network by, for, and about Orthodox women in the service of Christ. And we are honored today that our speaker today has agreed to be with us to talk us through how to integrate girls and boys into the liturgy with the goal of giving them a much greater sense of ownership and a chance to experience full participation in worship. Before I introduce her, just a few quick notes. The only people you'll be able to hear tonight are me as host and Dr. Regula as speaker. But we do want to hear from you. So please put any comments or items that you'd like to raise or questions in the chat feed. Just make sure that it's that you're directing your chat to host and panelists both, so that everybody can see them if you like. And I'll be raising your questions and comments for clarification while our speaker is talking, but I'll also be holding the rest of them to the end of her webinar, if that's the more appropriate spot. So I think there's no more need to delay, and it's time to introduce our speaker. Dr. Teva Regul was raised in the Orthodox Church and has been an active member all her life. For many years, she was involved in the work of youth ministries in the church, working on the national level of the American Romanian Orthodox Youth and serving 2 years as its national president. During much of this time, she also worked in campus ministry, organizing and coordinating various Orthodox Christian fellowships. So for the past 20 years, Teva's work has been focused on the ministry of women in the church. She served over 15 years as managing editor of the St. Nina Quarterly, a publication dedicated to exploring the ministry of women in the Orthodox Church, and one which aimed to cultivate a deeper understanding of the ministry in the lives of all Orthodox Christian women and men. In addition, she served as an Orthodox consultant for a number of consultations on women and men in the church, sponsored by the World Council of Churches. A lifelong student of theology, Teva completed her Master of Divinity degree at Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology in 2007, graduating with highest distinction. In addition to the ministry of young people and women, she is very interested in the church's liturgical life. She received her PhD focusing on liturgical theology and history from Boston College and has taught at her alma mater as well as the Papas Patristics Institute. At present, Teva serves on the board of the St. Phoebe Center for the Deaconess and is the current president of the Orthodox Theological Society in America. She was also an invaluable help as we were beginning to put Oxia Women together and has remained so to this day. Teva, thank you so much for being with us and giving us the benefit of your experience and your liturgical scholarship to help us work out how to integrate girls and boys into the liturgy. It's all yours.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Pat, for having me, and for all of the Oxia women for inviting me and to speak on one of my favorite topics of integrating girls and boys in our liturgical celebration. I just want to draw your attention to some of the graphics that I have. Most of the black and whites were taken by Jennifer Wilson, for whom I'm very grateful. And these are, if you can see my cursor here in the upper left, are girls participating in the Sunday of the Cross by holding some of the cross. In the center are both girls and boys, actually as altar servers in Damascus. And on the right, on my right, are both girls and boys ringing the bells. So just to show that the various ways that we are involved in our liturgical celebration. I want to emphasize that we are all called to participate in the life of the church. Today we celebrated Pentecost, the descent of the Holy Spirit, and it's important to realize that each one of us is given the gifts of the Spirit for the common good. We are all called to use our gifts to build up this body of Christ, whether we're clergy, monastics, chaplains, spiritual directors, chanters, choral members and directors, readers, homilists, parish administrators, philanthropic outreach coordinators, missionaries, or in the picture I have here is Christian educators. But this webinar is going to focus particularly on actually our liturgical celebration. Liturgy, as many of us know, the word itself etymologically is from the Greek litos ergon, meaning the work of the people. It is the communal work of the body of Christ, us as the body of Christ here. And liturgy is where the Christian encounters the love of God as a community, and we seek to draw all of us closer to God. It is one of the privileged sources of our liturgical life, of this encounter, and also the summit to which we are then called. It's continuously rounding. And here in the picture I've shown here is a hierarchical liturgy of the Kopeka Russian Church, and we have here both girls and boys holding candles for the gospel reading, ways to kind of involve everyone in this particular life. So why do I focus on liturgy for this particular webinar? It is the primary way that our faith is experienced, understood, expressed, and transmitted. It forms our identity. It allows us to, in fact, our identity that's made in the image of God. We're called to grow into God's likeness, and hopefully we're nurtured along the way. And we have the opportunity to be transformed, as Cyril of Jerusalem says in his mystagogical catechesis, in order to be little Christs, that we are to be little Christs. But in order to actually experience the power of this liturgy, we have to actually actively participate in it here. And here I have a photo of young girls lighting the candles during Vespers here. Now, this is not a new idea, the idea of active participation of all the laity in the liturgy, of all in the liturgy. And in fact, one of the most important voices for this came at the turn of the 20th century out of the Church of Russia during the time of the liturgical renewal movement in that church, Bishop Nazarius of Nizhny Novgorod. And I quote him here because I think it is such an important quote to share. The Orthodox faith is acquired, strengthened, and maintained chiefly by means of liturgical worship. Liturgical worship is properly considered to be the best school for teaching faith and morals, for it acts abundantly and salutarily on all the powers and capacities of the soul. But if worship is to accomplish all this, then all must be faithful, must participate in it directly, consciously, and actively. And here we have people singing and also learning how to sing. Now, we are all called to active participation in the liturgy. We are all called to pray the prayers of the service along with the priest, to join in the singing of the responses, to exchange the kiss of peace, to receive the Eucharist. All of those we are all called to do. And in addition, we each have our part to play. We have bishops, the overseers of our church, who then have deputized the local community, deputized presbyters to us to lead us. We have the laity and we have the deacons who kind of go between the clergy and the laity and the world, drawing all together here. Today, I'd like to focus on three particular ministries. One of the reader or chanter, the second of the altar server, and the third other form of liturgical service, which we'll call our liturgical service program. And I'll argue for the inclusion of both boys and girls in their exercise. So first, the reader or chanter. You know, as young people, we learn to read. This is reading applied to our liturgical texts. It's where the texts of the liturgy are where we learn about God. Jesus' teaching, his ministry, the saints, so much of the tradition is included in the prayers of the church. By reading those, we actually engage that text more deeply. The Christian story then becomes our story here. I mean, I've been reading in the church since I was 14 years old, the epistle. And to this day, I still, if I'm scheduled to read the epistle, I still take it home. I read it over a number of times. ahead of time to make sure I'm not just kind of reading words, but I'm telling a story. And so I'm not just allowing people to hear, but I'm proclaiming that story, and giving that story meaning, hopefully, for those who do hear. And certainly if our young people are gifted to sing, they should learn then how to chant and intone the text with nuance and meaning. Something that if they start young, they'll be more able to continue that as they grow older here. And here I have shots of a young girl reading, a woman then being blessed to read the epistle, and then reading the epistle in her liturgical assembly there. So why should, in fact, we have here, if we are, as we are getting older, as we get older and people then read in the service here, hopefully it then spurs their interest in continuing to learn about the scriptures and to engage more and more of our hymnography. And if they do that, if they grow and they keep going, they should then be called to be recognized and supported by the church. And the idea that they should have a formal blessing and tonsure by the bishop to do so. This call for participation in what are called, quote unquote, the minor orders of the church is something that's not new. It's over 100 years old. We see in 1918 at the Sobor in the Russian church during the revolution that the Russian bishops actually endorsed the practice of women reading and chanting in the parochial assembly. We also see in 1976, Metropolitan Emilianos Timiadis giving the keynote address to the first International Conference of Orthodox Women that was held in Agapia, Romania, explicitly suggests that women be admitted to these minor orders as readers and acolytes. And then also probably one of the most definitive consultations in 1988 at Rhodes was called by the Ecumenical Patriarch Demetrius I, where he called over 70 church representatives from all over the world, bishops, clergy, theologians, to really examine, probably one of the first consultations that examined the possibility or the understanding of women in the church, and the possibility, they did call for the possibility then of opening up these lower orders to women, including as subdeacons, tonsure readers, cantors, and teachers, etc. So why should women be blessed to read? If they read in the church now, and if we want our kids to start reading in the church, what does it matter if they're actually formally blessed to do so? I think it's important for the church to recognize and support their service, and for them to have the authority to speak in the liturgical assembly, but also for those who then are so blessed to have the responsibility to the church. They should be preparing, they should be studying so that they are reading with the authority. Secondly, kind of a stability for the ministry. I think it's important that when one is tonsured by the bishop, that means you have the authority to read in the entire diocese. It is less dependent on the priest at a particular parish. We all know that, sometimes you get a new priest that comes in, he doesn't really think that girls or women should be participating in a certain way, and he'll shut down that ministry with absolutely no recourse for us in general. And so I think that if women are actually blessed to do that, this is an important safeguard against that. And thirdly, that it models for the assembly that women's voices need to be heard, from the young ones to the older ones, women's and men's voices, actually. It brings to mind during the pandemic, when so many of us were home and our churches were open for only kind of 5 essential personnel, that so many of our churches, when you logged in through Zoom, only had male voices. There was the priest, the deacon, maybe an altar server, maybe a chanter or two, but they were all men. So it's important that we include women and girls in the voices of the church. Now, although it's rare, women are, in fact, or have been blessed. The example I show below is Metropolitan Philip Saliba of the Antiochian Archdiocese, of blessed memory, actually tonsuring 2 women and a man to read as readers in their parish. And this is the tonsure and the actual picture from after that. So it's something that if we train people from girls and boys from a young age, that they would hopefully grow in their love of reading, love of scripture and hymnography, to grow more and more and become something that they want to dedicate their lives to more fully. The second area that I'd like to talk about are altar servers. And I think this is one of the most important liturgical practices and pastoral issues of the day, because it affects so many of our kids. I'd like to begin by kind of explaining what is an altar server. Their role is primarily to assist the clergy. They light candles, they cut the antiteron, which is the holy bread, the bread that's not used for the actual offering. They can prepare the censer. They can hand the censer to the priest, as we see the young girl doing in the picture that I have here. They prepare the zion, which is the hot water that is added to the wine during preparation for communion, and hand it to the priest. Perhaps they hold some communion cloths, bread baskets. In general, it's a very functional kind of ministry, but one that is very, I think, has a lot of benefit. And we'll go over these in just a minute here. Now, we know that women actually have served as altar servers. Most particularly in women's monasteries, it's the women that are actually serving, as we see. But in parish settings, it's been open to both boys and girls in some places, more and more. Perhaps the paradigmatic example is the Church of Antioch, that officially opened this service to both boys and girls, except for the Diocese of the United States here. And here we see in the picture Metropolitan Georges Cordor, he's a famous metropolitan in the Antiochian Church, serving with a young altar girl to his left. Also, it's interesting to note that the Church of Russia, that many women served in the altar prior to the fall of communism. I mean, it was almost ubiquitous. One can argue it's because they were there, but they were there and they served. There didn't seem to be any reasons against that, and they were helping the clergy. Women also serve in the Armenian Church and some Coptic churches, and an occasional parish in the West here. So I just have some slides I'd like to show kind of in action, altar service in action. These first ones are from the Church of Antioch. In the left are both girls and boys, some vested, some not, in the great entrance here, and in the right, a great entrance procession of both girls and boys. These are continuing slides. We have two girls kind of quote unquote guarding the doors. They are actually holding the diaconal fans. To the right, we have both a girl and a boy holding candle for the gospel. And then below, with during the hierarchical liturgy, we have both girls, one holding a fan and the other here holding a candle, girls and boys serving in the great entrance, as we can see there. This is continuing the Church of Antioch. The picture on the left is a girl actually handing the basket for blessing of antiteron to the priest at the time of liturgy when one does so, which is towards the end of the anaphora, usually during the hymn to the birth giver of God in the Byzantine tradition. And she's doing so, if you notice, she's within the altar area here. So this actually is very functionally presenting the bread. And then on the bottom right, we have both girls and boys vested and lining up with candles for the great entrance procession. I have some shots from the Armenian Church. Now, the Armenian Church doesn't have the tradition of an iconostas superior, but as you can see in the upper right, we have women serving at the altar area with the clergy, and then also at the bottom left, holding candles for the gospel. We also have in the Church of Antioch in South America, this is a picture of, on the right, of both girls and boys serving, and then And the left, it's a shot of in the Coptic tradition. This was from California, taken a number of years ago here. So we see that that exists, and it's an important aspect of their participation in liturgy. So it's not something that doesn't happen at all. The shot I have here now on the left is taken from the United States in New York, of a girl, as we can see, with Bishop Seraphim Segrit, serving, which to be inside behind what is kind of a makeshift iconostas there, serving in the altar. And this is the shot that caused all kinds of consternation for some folks on the internet, in which forced the OCA bishops to speak negatively towards the practice. And I love Grumpy Cat, because Grumpy Cat says, it looks like I won't be serving in the altar anymore because too many people were upset because they mistook me for a girl cat. So it does seem to be the case that it's just the girls. Now, there are some reasons for people who are uncomfortable with this ministry, the reasons for the inclusion. These are probably the ones I have outlined here, are probably, I would say, the more popular ones I have heard. The first one is being kind of the newest, and I think the weakest from a theological perspective. It says that somehow by allowing girls to be altar servers, that they would somehow, quote unquote, conflate the genders, okay? As I mentioned before, this is kind of weak from a theological perspective, because altar service in and of itself doesn't have any gender determination to it. We have women in monasteries, we have women in other places, rather girls and boys in other places serving similarly. It doesn't seem to have brought into question their gender. We have women, men, boys and girls singing in choirs, chanting, all of those things together. I think it stems more, I think, from our current culture wars and the idea that, and I would assert that it's probably says more about the mindset of the objector than the actual young participant. I mean, a 9-year-old girl only wants to serve with her 7-year-old brother. She's not really worried about, conflating her gender in doing so. I think she just wants to participate. The second reason that you might hear is that it's not, quote unquote, part of the tradition of the church. It's true, the oldest tradition of the church is that only major clergy are in the altar area, i.e. the bishop, the presbyter, and the deacon. There are even canons against the subdeacons actually going into the altar. They're, quote unquote, to stay at the doors, okay? So having young people of any gender assist the clergy inside the altar is really an innovation. Probably the last 100 years or so, mostly in the West, that you will see the idea that almost any and all boys can serve. You don't really see this so much in traditional Orthodox countries. They tend to keep more to the older tradition in that regard. But if we are going to allow boys to serve, I think that we should also allow young girls to do so as well. The third reason that you'll see is that if you allow girls to serve in the altar, then they're going to want to be priests someday. And I would like to clarify that there is a distinction between the presbyter, the priest, and what I think is a much more diaconal function of the altar server. That they are helpers, that they're not part of that, they're not giving the offering. It's not what they call a sacerdotal ministry. I also want to suggest that this is not borne out by the facts. It's not borne out by our experience. We have had thousands of boys serve in the altars in our parishes. And yet I don't see those boys going to seminary to study for the priesthood in great numbers, or hardly in any numbers. We have a priest shortage these days. So I don't think that one could say that there's a causal relationship between wanting to help in the altar area at a young age and then wanting to become a priest someday. There perhaps is a connection, but not a causal relationship. And the last and probably the most, the reason that kind of dies the hardest is that somehow women are unclean by virtue of them having their periods, and therefore that they are not excluded from the altar area. itself here. This has a long history born out of Levitical prohibitions. It is found in a few rather obscure canons in our canonical tradition, most particularly in the second canon of Dionysius from the 3rd century, that speaks, particularly his opinion speaks about restricting menstruous women to even actually entering the temple area. And also Canon 44 of the local council in Laodicea speaks that, quote unquote, women just should not approach the altar. It doesn't give a reason why, although later commentators, especially Nicodemus of the Mountain, in the compilation of our canons called the Rudder, will posit that it had to do with women's menstruation. Now, it should be noted that these are in direct contradiction to a number of early church documents that speak to this issue. We have from the Didascalia Apostolorum, which is a later 3rd century, 4th century document that outlines some of the pastoral practice for the church at the time. And in chapter 26, it actually addresses these rabbinical rules of uncleanness. And here I quote, "Are they devoid of the Holy Spirit? For through baptism they receive the Holy Spirit, who is ever within those who work righteousness and does not depart from them by reason of natural issues in the intercourse of marriage, but is ever and always with those who possess him." And it goes on to explicitly state that the Holy Spirit remains with the woman during her monthly period, and that giving into rabbinical taboos and rules opens the way for the wrong spirit. This is addressed again 100 years later or so in a document called the Apostolic Constitutions, which is a 4th, 5th century document on church ethics and liturgics, which actually extends this emphasis. And I quote here again, "For neither the lawful mixture, in other words, sexual intercourse, nor childbearing, nor the menstrual purgation, nor nocturnal pollution can defile the nature of a person or separate the Holy Spirit from him, but only impiety towards God and transgression and injunction towards one's neighbor." So this is a much larger issue and probably more than we can actually deal with here, but suffice to say that ancient commentators really did not have a good understanding of women's bodies and our natural biological functions. So they made their opinions accordingly. Okay. There's also Levitical prohibitions for men, although somehow these get routinely ignored. And there are also canons against any layperson except the emperor entering into the altar area. Understanding of our canonical tradition is a complex subject, but to understand that there are pastoral directives that contain elements of truth, usually written for a time and a particular place. But the question is, how do we interpret them for today? And this is something that the church is more actively doing in regards to some of these issues. And in particular, note that the Church of Antioch has actually officially abrogated these prohibitions for women back in 1997. So they understood that as basically that they are no longer valid reasons. So when I was at seminary, I was very interested in this topic, and so I took it upon myself to ask the notable professors at that time. I said, well, I asked Father Alcibiades Kalivas, who's the eminent professor of liturgics at Holy Cross, and I asked Dr. Louis Patzavos, who is the professor of canon law, and also Father Emmanuel Klopsies, who was the professor of dogmatic theology and the dean at the time. And I said, look, is there any good theological reason why we can't allow females to do this? And they all said to me, no, there's no good theological reason, and that allowing females to serve is consistent with the living tradition of the church, which I thought was a very important thing to emphasize here. So if there are no good reasons why women should be, or girls should be excluded, why should they be included? What are the reasons for their inclusion? And I'm going to outline 4 reasons for the participant and then speak just briefly about reasons for inclusion in the assembly, of which I'll speak more to when we get to the third part of this discussion. So the first reason I gave is catechetical, an opportunity for quote unquote active learning. The liturgical services of our church are filled with opportunities to learn about and draw closer to God. They're serving within the altar is an example of this kind of active learning, to provide an opportunity, an important opportunity to shape our relationship with God in a positive manner. And it can increase our connection, our understanding of, and our connection to the celebration that is done for and with believers, but one in which many of the liturgical actions are rarely, if ever, seen or experienced by those in the congregation. So first, by not allowing females the opportunity to serve, they are being deprived of an important catechetical opportunity. Now, this is not to disparage the perspective of those participating in the congregation, but a much richer and wider, deeper understanding of the service is experienced when participating in the altar area. And I remember when I was at seminary, I was taking this evolution of the liturgy course, and I was putting all kinds of effort into it. And, we'd come for discussion, and, they're going over the nuts and bolts of the various elements of the service. And all these guys knew all these little things of which I had no real knowledge or understanding. And I was so amazed that just by being there and participating, that they knew a lot that I had to kind of just sort of read. Now, it's important to read about the liturgy, okay? But by actually being there and experiencing it, I think you get a much deeper understanding. The difference between, reading about how to learn to ride a bike and actually getting on the bike and riding it and understanding the balance and getting it in your body, to understanding your body. Now, I think it's also important that the current policy that we have of only allowing males, primarily boys, to serve also can have an adverse effect on them. Like, many should be offering their gifts and other capacities and learning about the liturgy from those experiences, for instance, singing in the choir or chanting. But somehow they're only encouraged to serve in the altar, and they're limiting these other educational opportunities or ways of encountering God in the liturgy. So having the important catechetical opportunity, I think, is important. Secondly, is the idea of spiritual growth. So not allowing girls or women the opportunity to serve can have an adverse effect on their spiritual lives. And this is especially true, I think, of girls who really want to serve and are not allowed just because they find themselves in this female body. Not only do they miss an intimate connection with the liturgy, but they are told that their gifts are not welcome. So as much as the church can be a community within one experiences the living God, this rejection, which can be quite painful, may be an impediment to that growth of the relationship, and their experience of liturgy is then colored by this rejection. Okay. Third, I would say that the current practice does damage to the integrity of the church. And what I mean by that is because altar servers are open to any and all males, regardless generally of any moral or ethical considerations. And in some jurisdictions, you have young kind of quote unquote altar boys. They are in fact tonsured as quote unquote readers, a function that some of them not even able to do and almost never actually do in the liturgical celebration, to elevate them to the level, to remove them from the status of quote unquote laity and elevate them to the status of quote unquote clergy, therefore kind of doing a workaround around some of those canonical prohibitions that I mentioned earlier. And in some jurisdictions, they even, those same boys are actually even vested with the stole, which is the stole for the subdeacon. And that's a ministry to which they have not been set aside. So in both cases, the actual ministry of the reader and the subdeacon are actually devalued. In addition, although it is common practice today for subdeacons to serve in the altar area, the Canon 22 of the Council of Laodicea actually forbids it from leaving the doors, and it also forbids the subdeacon from wearing the orarion. And this is the same council that also forbid women from approaching the altar. So where one canon, we have this idea that, while the canon about women is more strictly adhered to, the canons that deal with how we understand our minor orders are somehow routinely ignored. And the church becomes this an institution that professes one thing about its ministries and does another, therefore like kind of damaging its own integrity. And the last reason that in terms of the participant that I will actually speak to in terms of the reasons for inclusion is that only limiting these things to boys can give them a false sense of, or inculcate them. Instead of inculcating them a sense of service, we get that, we give them a kind of a false sense of entitlement that is, I would say, antithetical to the gospel and message of humility and in service of Christ and his church. Now, we've gone over altar service, and it seems cognitively.
Sorry, Teva, can I interrupt you just a second?
Sure.
There's a comment saying that bishops are afraid of too much flack from parishioners if they allow girls to read the epistle and serve in the altar. Would you like to talk about that? And can I just note that there's a lot of paper noise on your mic.
A lot of what noise?
There's a lot of static from paper on your mic. I don't know if you
okay.
have papers anywhere
well,
near.
Once in one, I'll try to deal with that.
But,
I have some notes here on paper, so.
Fair. Do you want to just address that bishops being afraid of flack from their parishioners, or do you want to talk about that later?
Well, I think it segues well into what I'm going to talk about now. Okay. So let me move into talking about that now, and we'll hopefully address that issue as we go. Okay.
All right, I will leave you.
I think that cognitively and understanding kind of from a theological perspective, there is no real good reasons why women and girls especially can't, since we're talking about young people, can't actually serve in these capacities. But sometimes, as we say, it's a bridge too far. Sometimes the assembly may not be ready for such a jump in terms of participation of the young people. So how do we essentially capture some of the benefits of that service without kind of crossing some of these barriers? Okay, first of all, it takes great education in order to move in this direction, but this is one that I'll speak to here. Pat, did you want to?
Yeah, someone's asking for you to describe what a handmaiden is.
Well, I haven't spoken about a handmaiden.
Oh, okay, sorry, it seems like, okay.
Oftentimes they're ministries particular to the young girls. They're called handmaidens, but we'll leave it at that here, okay? But I would like to actually introduce a ministry that we've implemented in our parish that has actually been subsequently picked up by other parishes as well, that to address this issue, okay? And rather the issue of sometimes altar service might be a bridge too far for you, but still ways to, in fact, integrate young children and teens into the liturgical celebration. This particular program grew out of our church school as a way to get kids more actively involved in liturgy and to way to kind of connect them to its the celebration through its ritual expression. It's built around kind of 3 pivot points in the liturgical celebration. The first is being the gospel reading, where we have 2 of our students join the other altar servers as either candle or icon bearers. And the idea that here from the symbolism, we're drawing focus to so they learn that they are drawing focus, that they are focusing on the gospel, and that they are being the light of Christ to send out. It also has resonances with kind of the parable of the 10 virgins, ways to kind of to show and make those connections. And then they have to really pay attention. They have to know when to go. They had to learn what an epistle was first, because they go to their plots after the epistle reading. Many of them didn't know what an epistle was, okay? And then they have to pay attention to the gospel reading as well, okay? The second pivot point is around the great entrance, where we have icon bearers and candle bearers. Actually, and our bread basket presenters join in the procession of those continuing of the great entrance procession. With the icon bearers, they usually carries the icon of the feast day or the church icon or an icon of the saint. And we always talk about it first before they go out to point out, this is what you're carrying. So you understand more fully and you're presenting this to the congregation. And then the breadbasket presenters of the Antediron, we talk about what this is in terms of these are the leftovers. And this is how we understand that in the early church, they took the offering and it was the offering of the people. And then all the leftovers were taken up for a blessing and then distributed either at the agape meal or to the poor, the widows, the orphans after the church. So we're connecting this in some small way that this is what we're doing and why, okay? And then lastly, the last pivot point is when they actually then present the bread for the blessing, right towards the end of the anaphora. And this just continues to kind of carry on that tradition in a small way. So what are the benefits? What Mike can say, what are the benefits? Certainly it's, our liturgy is very powerful, but often very inaccessible here. And there are great benefits to the program, not as much as I think of including in the altar itself, but we still try to keep a lot of the catechetical benefits. The first, as I mentioned earlier, the icon bearers, we explain the liturgy, they're learning the structure, they're learning the flow, they have to know for their cues. When they go to the icons, they have to understand what they're actually carrying for them. They're learning what they're doing and why they're doing it in particular in that way. The breadbasket, as we mentioned earlier, why, in fact, what are they carrying? How did this come about? They actually do make the bread in a number of, we have retreats, we have a big fall retreat for liturgy, and they actually make a ton of prospera. So they're always incredibly excited when, we're using their prospera for the offering, but then to understand the difference between that and what they're carrying there. I have a little excerpt here from one of our teen girls. That she says, participating in liturgical service ministry has taught me more about the divine liturgy than anything else I have participated, including church school, teen youth group, Bible Bowl, etc. And being part of the service meant that I had to learn the significance of each part and I had to pay attention. So they're learning about the service, and we have here books for them to follow along, especially as they move through the service. And what I usually do is play these like little kind of games, especially with the young kids. I ask them to count how many times we say some key words. For instance, how many times do we say thanks or praise or bless or love or peace? And then at the end of the service, I ask them, well, how many times did you count? Okay. And then I say, well, what is one of the, what are we doing here? What's the main theme, And if you count, we say thanks or something about Thanksgiving approximately 9 times or so, depending upon what the choir sings. And they say, oh, we're giving thanks, So it really makes sense to them what we're doing when we kind of gather together. They have to pay much more attention because they have to know then when to go up to give the bread, in this instance, in the picture I'm showing here. The second is the idea of spiritual growth, that it helps them engage with the liturgy. It can be a positive experience for them, for girls as well as boys. I have a quote from another young teen here, that I've been taking part in liturgical service since I was 10. It is a huge part of my experience of church, and one of the things I look forward to on Sunday. Being able to be part of the church service rather than just in the audience, interesting choice of words, helps me to enjoy and understand the service. So I thought that was an interesting way that she kind of captured her experience. More so, we have a quote from a young mother saying, it's wonderful to see all my children participate in the liturgy. It gives them a feeling of being involved and, more importantly, brings them closer to God. And I love this picture here because the young girl serving with her brother just looks so happy and so kind of that she's excited about being here and doing this. Next is the actual integrity of the church that I spoke with earlier. So both boys and girls are participating. we have the idea from a young teen. I think it's important that not only boys get to experience that, in this, they're talking about liturgical service, because as a kid, it is hard to see that I can't be part of the church as much as just because I am a girl. So this is kind of from a young teen. These are in her words. And similarly from a mother. I think it is important to show all of our children that girls are valued for who they are and the strengths they bring. If we limit their abilities within the church or elsewhere, we send the message that they are less than. And then there's actually some practical value in this. It encourages families to actually get to church on time. A young mother commented to me how one time her young charge was so excited about leading the great entrance procession with an icon that he talked about it for weeks. They studied it beforehand. He woke his parents up extra early in the morning, like, Christmas morning kind of thing, and that he was to serve, and so that they could be in church on time. And that he had a big smile on his face during the procession, and he talked about his experience constantly for the next week. And to me, this is just wonderful to have kids actually, whether they're boys or girls, have an experience such as this, a liturgical experience such as this. Now, there are also benefits for the assembly, not just for those who actually participate, okay? And there's also, in particular, the educational benefits for the assembly. The parents have to actually learn about liturgy themselves. It's amazing how, even people who grew up in the church know very little about the structure of the service, what we're actually doing, when and why. So when kids ask, they have to kind of learn about this. And they can actually also participate too. And we have, and during the summer months, we've expanded it to family service. So one little vignette here is at one particular service, a woman who had been Orthodox all her life observed that it was the first time that she really felt that the entire community was part of the offering. The great entrance was imbued with new meaning and a deepened theological significance. By including members of an assembly in the ritual procession of the offering, the meaning that this is offering of the people, this is the offering of the people, was made real. There is the joy of participation for parents to see, and quote unquote, including girls in the workings of the liturgy has been a joyful experience for the girls, their families, and the entire parish. I have especially enjoyed watching my daughter process with her brothers as an equal participant in our beautiful liturgy. And then there is modeling for others. I have a story of a young girl who came with her mother, and all of a sudden, quite spontaneously, she comes up and wants to hold the icon for the great entrance. And usually, we have teams assigned, but, the adult supervisor for the day wisely kind of folded her in with her mother. And she was so excited, and she did it so reverently that it was this wonderful experience for her. And I thought about it, and I thought, what does this say? What is this saying? I think, for one, that she was watching the liturgy and that she was paying attention. She knew this happened, okay? The two, that she wanted to participate in the liturgy. Three, she saw other girls doing it and that she felt she could do it, that this was open to her, that this was an invitation for her, that we could accommodate. She did so with incredible reverence. And she talked about it for weeks and looked forward to coming back to church. It was a great thing not to have to say, oh, sorry, honey, that's just for the boys. And to wonder then why you couldn't do it just because you were a girl. So I think these sound so simple, but they're so important for young people, especially. And then the last kind of benefit for the assembly, as I alluded to earlier, is the idea of family service. And that in the summertime, especially, we have kind of families kind of serve together so that we realize that we're all this part of this body of Christ and we're all serving together. And it also kind of mitigates against the idea that, well, this is just a kid thing. And you just, well, you're a teenager, you're too cool for that. You kind of just grow out of it. So it allows us to see that we never grow out of liturgical serving Christ. So I now have some kind of shots that you can kind of get to see. This is at the gospel where we have the great entrance would be kind of in the middle, or rather the holy gates would be in the middle of the picture here. That you see the girls in this particular picture lining up with the altar servers left and right. And this is kind of a view of the gospel reading, kind of looking out during COVID. Everybody was masked. So this is one of these where everybody's masked. In this version, they're holding icons, not candles. This is another parish that has implemented this, and this is what it looks like in their context. They have people kind of surrounding the ambone where the gospel is proclaimed. This is kind of preparing during the great entrance. After the great censing, during the cherubic hymn is when, after the censing of the people is when we prepare. We're off kind of to the side, to the left in our choreography here. On the left picture, you see me kind of getting the kids ready with the icons. And on the right, after is when they come out and line up, then ready for the procession itself. This is the procession starting. The procession is the great entrance in the Byzantine tradition, actually goes out the north door and circumvents the entire congregation, and then it comes back to the Solea. In the Slavic tradition, it tends to mimic the little entrance more and doesn't generally make such a large circle here. Our breadbasket presenters go to the at the end of the procession. And we'll see where they sit when we get there. This is the procession coming back now coming back towards the Solea as we move forward. And when they get there, they split and they once again form, kind of go to the right and to the left of the altar area where Father reads the names before he then goes back into the altar area itself. And this is kind of the tableau look here. We have those on the left and the right. And then we also have behind the fans, we have the breadbasket presenters who actually stay in the front middle of the front pews and then present at a later point in time the anaphora. So I'm going to stop my sharing here now, and I have two short little clips I can show to give you a sense of what this looks like in real time. The sound is very light, so it'd be hard to hear, but just to give you a sense of what it looks like.
Derek and family, Ronnie and family, Yano and family, Simone, Anise, Liz, Victoria, Fatty, Raphael, Stephen, John, Jody, Matthew, Drew, Sherry, Betty, Joe, Helen, Shirley, Selma, William, Nadia, Naheem, Adrienne, Steve, Bonnie, Dorothy, Peter, Victor, Gabriel, Michael, Franca.
And that continues. And then I have one more little clip. It's this one. As they come in and bow, and then they exit. In our choreography, they exit to the left. Okay, so those were the little clips to give you a sense of kind of what it looks like in real time. And this is what the great entrance looks like in another parish where both the girls and the boys are at the foot of the solea prior to entering, the clergy entering back into the altar area. And here are the bread baskets in action. As I mentioned before, after everybody from the great entrance exits, they sit down in those front pews and they follow along the books until their time when they go present the bread towards the end of the anaphora. So they're there for like 10 or 15 minutes following the service as we go through, and then they go up to give the presentation for the bread baskets, or the antiteron there. Oops, somehow I lost the screen share. Okay. This is, we've also recently incorporated the icon bearers with the bread baskets in the front. After the icon bearers kind of exit from the great entrance, we have them come back around and sit in the front with the bread basket presenters. So they too will have to look and read the service and pay attention for the cues to go on, to move before the bread basket presentation. This is at another parish where they also have the young people present the bread. And we try to then also have the bread basket presenters also hold then the bread baskets during communion, for after communion. So they make some connection with that this is the leftovers that they presented, it's been blessed, and now they bring it back for people to actually partake after they've received the Eucharist. And as I mentioned, we do have adult service that the adults generally on the right hold the communion cloths. And then on the left is a picture of during Women's Month, where we expanded the service for women during the month of March, that they actually fill all the roles. So the young people can watch them actually participate as well. Once again, nobody's aging out of liturgical service here. So some practical things, since I've talked much longer than I thought, and so we'll bring it to a conclusion shortly. Preparation is the key. Really understanding that you have to, this grew from our church school program, and later, as I mentioned, expanded to families and certain groups. We did get our bishops okay ahead of time. Sometimes you want to keep the bishop informed. Sometimes it's how much informing is up to you. But then we had to prepare people. We had to explain what we were doing and why and how it fit into the tradition of the church, and to allow that this was something that was important, an important catechetical tool for those who are participating and for those. We had meetings with the kids. We had meetings with their parents. We had a letter to the congregation. Father talked about it from during the announcements. So, you know, this was something that you had to prepare the congregation for, get them used to the idea, okay? Then we rehearsed. We had, the choreography was important. It had to look good. And for the kids, they had to really feel comfortable with their service, so they wouldn't be like overly nervous, okay? So it's that it had to look good, and that was important. We also incorporated adult supervisors. We have a rotation of about 4 of us, to actually help them out, give them cues, make sure things go off, explain the icons, etc. And we found when we first started that we had a lot of adults that wanted to help, but they didn't know the liturgy either. They didn't know the flow. So they've had to learn the flow, learn the structure, learn what things mean and why we do things. And this has been helpful for both the kids and the adults. And then to be able to realize to adapt if necessary. We first had all the kids sitting in the front center rows of the pews there, and that was considered to be too distracting. So we moved them to the side. Less efficacious from the catechetical perspective. But, you know, we kind of took people's concerns into account and were able to modify accordingly. And then the last one I had is to be, quote unquote, politically smart. And by that, I mean, we talked to some of the very important people in the parish. We explained things, we heard their concerns. So it wasn't a a way to kind of include them in the process. And then, of course, we also included some of their kids and or grandkids in the first kind of weeks that we did this, so they would feel like that this was, they would have some buy-in to the program. And we intentionally made it co-ed. We didn't want it to be just a gender determined thing. Oh, this was for the girls, because then it gets, it becomes a target for complaints. We wanted this to be for all the kids, and we wanted it to be for everyone. There are things that I wish we would have done. I wish we would have had some kind of distinctive clothing, like one of the parishes we saw here had capes for the girls. Sometimes it's really hard to be the clothing police, and it's hard to kind of get them to dress appropriately. And another thing that I wish we had done was when we bake the prospera, I would love to have the kids come early then to be the ones that cut it, the ones that are presenting it for the day, and then hold it for communion. So make it all one movement, okay? They've baked the prospera, they come early to cut it, they present it, they hold it for communion. It's kind of one kind of large movement. I have a story about that, but I'll skip that for now in the interest of time. So to conclude, liturgy is more than just texts. It's what we say and it's what we do. And by participating, we can learn about the liturgy. We can learn to be people of gratitude, mercy, love. We can give our sacrifice of praise. We can serve God and one another. And this is something that we are all called to do. So thank you very much. So Pat, I'm
sorry, working on getting my, yes, my Zoom skills, even after so many years, are not quite what they should be. No, thank you very much, Teva. That was really enlightening on so many different levels. Do you mind taking a few questions?
Oh, sure, go ahead. There's so much more I could have said, but I spoke a little bit longer than I thought it was going to take.
Oh, it went really quickly. Don't even think about it, and maybe we can have you back for part 2 at some point. It would be fascinating. Is there a minimum level of church schooling that a child should have before taking part in this kind of program?
Generally, when we assign just the kids during the church school year, we usually have an age of, they have to be in first grade. They have to have some way to kind of, so they're not fussing and doing whatever. When we have family service, we've had in the past younger kids than that, but they generally are accompanied by a parent during the procession. So it's ways to kind of, keep them in order. It's sometimes harder with the young boys because they tend to be more antsy, but this also gives them a more specific directionality to their movement, what they're doing and how they should comport themselves in church. So I think that it's been a helpful, formative experience in that regard.
Yeah, that makes total sense as someone who had a son myself back in the day. There was a question about family service. Could you just talk about that a little bit? Someone was asking, does the whole family serve at those times?
Yes. So, we have at the various pivot points, and either they're holding, for instance, candles or icons at the gospel. They're also presenting at the great entrance, and then also then presenting the Titeron towards the end of the anaphora. We have parents and kids doing it together. So sometimes we'll have the parents hold the icons, and sometimes the kids will. Sometimes the parents will do the bread baskets, and the kids will do, the icons. So it can kind of mix and match. Sometimes a father and a son do something together, and a mother and a daughter do something together. So it's a really good way to serve as a family, that you are doing things as a family together. And with an ancillary benefit, as I mentioned earlier, that to show that you don't really age out of this service. Everybody does it, that kind of thing.
That is really lovely. Someone asks, in discussing participation for your webinar and the mission to integrate both girls and boys in the Divine Liturgy, in my local area, one priest responded by saying that he's not yet ready to start anything that requires much explanation at this moment. So do you have a suggestion about how we as non-ordained faithful can help in this case where the priest is interested but the congregation needs extensive explanation? Should we just share this recording as a start?
Well, that would probably be a good idea, I guess. Yeah, why not? There has to start somewhere, right? So to be able, I think pictures are key to this. That's why I try to show a lot of them. Pictures are worth 1,000 words, as they say, but I think it's really true that to see it and to see, you know, things are scandalous at first. The communion spoon was a huge scandal at first because it's totally unbiblical. And yet now for some people, it's a huge scandal if we don't have it, you know. But so it's sort of was ways, and any new thing will be met with a certain amount of resistance, but you do it for a few times. And, you know, I used to joke and I said, well, it's a terrible innovation for the first few times you do it. And then after a month, it's tradition. We've always done it this way, you know. So, no, but it is something that you have to do your homework and you have to, you know, prepare people. It's important to prepare people, but to allow them to, and don't back down at the first sign of you know, you can't say, oh, well, that didn't work, forget it. You know what I mean? You have to work through whatever their concerns are, because generally speaking, it will benefit far more people than anybody who's complaining about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there have been a couple of comments that were similar. One says that she's supportive, but feels that it's hopeless to get a bishop or a priest to listen. And another said that she feels that the bishops are too much afraid of flack from parishioners if they allow girls to read the epistle and serve in the altar, or maybe just serve generally. So, I mean, what would you suggest? Like, how would you approach, or how have you approached bishops on this subject?
Well, I think the two can be decoupled, because the girls reading in church and reading the epistle are far more prevalent in our practice in the church in the United States than any kind of altar services. So, I mean, I've read the epistle since I was 14, you know, I mentioned. Now, it still can be controversial in some places, but it's not out of the realm of general possibilities, okay? So I think a good case can be made in that sense, to start small, start reading the hours, or read, you know, the Psalms or things like that don't require such a public reading, or reading Old Testament passages at Vespers or vigil services. And then hopefully that segues into the liturgy itself, get people, that kind of gets them used to the idea. The idea of liturgical service is a little bit more novel in terms of that, but once again, I think can you say the question again? I think I've gotten off track.
Oh, it's just how, do you have suggestions about how to get bishops on board with this overall?
I think when the bishops, they don't like unrest in their diocese, okay, which is understandable, right? But what I'd like to propose now is that they don't see what I call the silent schism at the moment. They don't see how for not engaging these questions, you know, how families just disappear, you know, they just disappear. Or they become so disconnected that, you know, their kids end up disappearing. So we have to bring that realization to them, okay? And to show that these are issues that need to be dealt with, that need pastoral ways to encounter. And this is, from our program, it's certainly a concession to that. You know, we didn't have robes, we didn't go on the altar, that kind of thing. Those kind of things tend to set off alarm bells for some people. Then it goes back to the idea that bishops should lead. They should be able to explain and nurture and bring along people in ways that can be life-giving for the congregation. It might not work in all congregations, something like this, but a lot of places are certainly ready for it. And that can be part of their mission. It also helps to explain this to people in the parish who tend to be very powerful people. Now, what I mean by that, there's a lot of lay people that are very active in the diocesan level and things like that. And the bishops, and if this is a positive experience that they've seen in their parish, the bishops are more likely to listen to them because they listen to them for other things. And that might help to kind of, break down that little barrier as well, to kind of entertain this option and to see how important it is. I don't think they think it's very important, because it is quite simple. Altar service is quite simple, but I don't think they realize how that the current status quo is very alienating to many girls and many young people, many families, and it's teaching the wrong thing to boys. So to point those things out, I think, are helpful and important to be able to do.
And it might also help, I think, if people give positive feedback to bishops when they do have programs like this, because I think most people are more willing to give people negative feedback. We have a couple of other comments or questions. In hindsight, why would you suggest that girls wear a cape? And could the boys and girls both wear the same uniform? She says, I'm conscious about the emphasis we place on women about modesty, as though this doesn't apply to the whole congregation.
Well, I didn't say they should wear a cape. That was one example of one parish that's how they do it. I do think that some kind of special attire for all of them would be helpful. I was thinking a vest or something. We have thought about it, it just never happened, okay? That it elevates the importance of the ministry, okay? And it also helps to, you don't have to be the clothes police all the time, something like that. So if they could all wear robes, that would be great with me, because then you wouldn't have to worry about it. So I think that, that was, if we were to do that, start now, I think that that would be part of the program. It's harder to do it once you have it in place. So you want to start everything at the beginning as you would want them to start.
A question is, in what archdiocese have there been successes, please? The questioner comes from the Antiochian Archdiocese.
Well, it's not necessarily a diocesan thing. I would say that the ones that I've shown, or the ones that have adopted this program that I know of, include the Antiochian, OCA, and Greek archdiocese, here and there, that kind of thing. So I wouldn't say that any of these are, unfortunately, not any of these are diocesan wide. It would be wonderful if they were picked up and spread, because then it would take some of that bite out of it in terms of, but we haven't gotten to the critical mass point yet.
Question, where can we find evidence for women serving in the Russian church before the revolution?
It's not before the revolution. It was prior to communism.
Oh, sorry.
The fall of communism.
Okay.
I don't know that there's, well, you could ask any member of the OCA Synod that went over right after the fall of communism, because they all witnessed it. So anybody that went on those trips all witnessed it. I don't know that there's a lot of pictures or anything like that, to go with it.
Okay, where are we? Oh, another question is it all right if some of the folks who are in the audience tonight contact you?
Sure,
after
yeah.
this? Okay. Are you all right? How would you like them to contact you?
Here, let me put an email in the chat. I'll put it to everyone. I'll just give my Gmail address. Right. So I have plenty of, we wrote up a lot of the things that we do here. I wasn't sure if it was clear to kind of how it works, but we wrote up, instructions for the supervisors, or point people, instructions for the kids, instruction, that kind of thing. So it's, we have those documents available if people want them.
Are they on your on the parish website or?
The general description is on the parish website, but I have like a lot more detailed stuff, like how we did our choreography. Like it's going to depend, how it actually looks in each individual is going to depend upon the architecture and the setup of the particular parish, and how it kind of, what the best way is for that to work in that particular setting. So this is how it works in our setting, that kind of thing. But it doesn't mean that's how it has to work in all settings.
So who then designs how it works? Like if you have a general template, if someone wanted to borrow, like use your general template, who would then be the person who would adapt it for the circumstances in that particular parish?
Well, the person who essentially is running the ministry in that particular parish, right, in consultation with their priest and whomever else they need to consult with. Certainly we can be of help to say, well, why don't you try this or that kind of thing. But I mean, they have to, it has to take into consideration what their particular parish looks like and how it might work there.
There's a comment that the church was affected just before communism. You need to look at times like the 15th century for deacons' engagement in the Russian church.
Well, the church is always affected by its cultural setting and its political response, a response to the politics. The Russian church was going through an incredible renewal right prior to the revolution. And unfortunately, that was totally stymied because of the revolution, both liturgical and, of course, its impact on the canonical situation in the United States. So, yeah, and it takes hundreds of years to get out of that. The Greek church was under the Turkocratia for 500 years, and they take it's still 100 years they've been out, but they're still suffering from that kind of experience. So.
Someone commented, you mentioned that this mission of integrating both girls and boys is innovative, but could you mention a few words about how the female diaconate is part of the ancient tradition of our church? Your topic of expertise, she believes. I think if more people knew this fact, they may not be so surprised.
Well, that's a big topic. So, yes, the female diaconate is, we know that there were women ordained to the higher order of the diaconate and existed at least around the year 1200, probably relegated more to women's monasteries from around 700 or so on. But that was also parallels the decline of the entire diaconate. We know a little bit about their ministry, and over probably for a good 100 years or so, we've also been trying to revive this as an important ministry within the church, especially for women, but not exclusively for women. And if you look at the site www.orthodoxdeaconess.org, you'll find a lot of information about the diaconate. I can put that in the chat as well.
Someone else here says that the key to getting a ministry started for girls at her church was relatively easy, because the girls and their moms were excited, and the moms were the ones who were key to getting it started.
Good. Hopefully their dads are too.
Yeah.
But yeah, they can be excited about it and do it, but it takes a lot of work. Okay, I'm not going to whitewash that at all. To keep it going and to keep moving, it takes a lot of work. And, in our instance, we have a largish church school. So everybody's kind of, assigned, particular weeks where they serve, but just juggling the schedule itself is like one big kind of juggle thing. So it's difficult as well. So, it's not easy. And then we had to survive COVID, and it's easy to just kind of chuck those things after an experience like this. But we were kind of determined to kind of, okay, we're all back in church. Let's go back to it, So to really, to really think that it's important and not an aberration, and to integrate it as part of the life of the parish.
Someone commented that people will tell the girls that they just need to suck it up if they don't feel included in church. Do you have a comment about what to do with people who feel like girls need to suck things up?
Do they ever tell that to the boys?
Mm.
So, I mean, no, they don't, right? Because all the options are open for them. So I think it's sort of, I don't want to be so harsh, but it's kind of like an abuser, or little bit of gaslighting here. You're diminishing their experience. They're saying that your experience is not real, it's not valued, and that's problematic on actually a number of levels in terms of that. So I do one thing I want to say about, parishes that, our parish would freak out, that kind of thing, if you had girls do X, that kind of thing. Maybe not. I mean, the important thing is to prepare them educationally. But then how long? You cannot wait for the lowest common denominator. People will come aboard. If their entire faith is based on the exclusion of girls in the liturgical celebration, then I think that's problematic just for their own understanding of the Orthodox faith. And if they walk because of that, and that kind of thing. But how many people, and this goes back to the idea of that silent schism, are walking because they don't feel as if their voices are even being heard and included and understood that this is problematic for them. So I think that we shouldn't be so afraid of offending people in that regard.
We have a question. If the priest and bishop are not open to having girls involved in the liturgical service, what would be your response to the girls and parents of girls who want to be involved?
Well, to become educated themselves, to see, to look at, so for instance, if they watch this presentation and they see all the pictures of all the other place, and to bring that to the attention of the parish. So it would be a groundswell kind of bubbling up, so to speak, in terms of that. This is not a panacea. It doesn't get you all the way. If a priest is totally adamant against something like this, it's not going to fly. So that's when you have to make certain decisions about where you want to actually participate in the life of the church.
We have a suggestion: meet with the bishop personally. There are shepherds and need to hear our voices.
Mm-hmm.
Another comment: deaconesses in the church today are rare. Here and there in Greece or in convents, although the Armenian church has deaconesses serving today.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's kind of interesting. The Armenian church is very old and very conservative, but yet they seem to be more insulated from some of the currents of backlash of Western culture wars. And so that allows them to move forward within their own realm to meet the ministerial needs of the people. I mean, that's why, the liturgical expression of the church actually changes all the time. We think that somehow it's kind of stuck in stone in X century, but actually, even in my own lifetime, I've seen certain changes that have then been incorporated in the respective books. But usually imperceptibly in terms of that. But it's the reason for the change. It's always been best when changes have been in response to meeting the pastoral needs of the people. That is one of the most important metrics in our liturgical expression, how the change has come about. Now, oftentimes it's haphazard, every priest is his own typicon, as they say, that kind of thing. But it's been best when it actually meets the needs of the people. And there's a lot of flexibility in our tradition to do that. We just have to realize it in terms of that.
Absolutely. Teva, thank you so very much for this.
Well, thank you all for joining. I really enjoyed chatting. chatting with everyone, sort of, at least seeing your comments and things. I hope that, certainly it's been helpful, or rather that it's been helpful for me to hear them. One last thing that I see someone comment I think would be important, is to identify the slippery slope comment. That somehow if you allow girls to do this, and I identified it, or rather I spoke to it briefly in the presentation, that, well, they're going to want to be priests and bishops the next day, that kind of thing. I think that speaks to a larger issue of how we understand our orders, and to make sure that we can understand the distinction between the orders. But I don't see it, as I mentioned, as there's no actual evidence of any of that, even for men. So I don't see that it would be a problem for women either. Now, it could also be the case that it would put the question into perspective. It might raise the question more clearly, but then we should be able to answer that question on our own terms. And the church should be honest enough to answer that question. If there are no, for instance, the priesthood, which seems to be the real elephant in the room, people have been grappling with the idea of an all-male priesthood, and so far the reasons put forth have not been received by the church. So, and that's, I do believe, and this is my personal opinion, if we did have a well-developed and received and understood reason for the all-male priesthood, all of these other things from the female diaconate on down would not even be an issue, because we would all know where the line was, and that would be it, and we could then fill in everything to that line. Okay, the problem is that we don't, and that's why people are so afraid of that this would somehow lead to having women wanting to be priests. I mean, if that would be the case, first of all, it would be another 500 years. None of us will be around. But but I think that you shouldn't hold hostage and to understand our lower orders, and I think mostly from its catechetical import from here. That this is a really wonderful way. I mean, I know from the first time I actually served as a real bona fide altar server. I mean, I couldn't get my eyes off of what was going on, because it was so mesmerizing to me, and that it really connected me to the liturgy. And I know a lot about liturgy, and I've studied it, but it connected to me, and it connected with me in such a way that it was much more visceral and I want everybody to have that experience. So I think for that would probably be a good way to sign off.
It is, and also the final comment here. Thank you for this presentation, and for the years of commitment and time and effort that you've brought to it.
Certainly, you're welcome. I appreciated doing it. Or rather, I enjoyed doing it, and I appreciate everyone here for being part of our conversation, and to continue it, to take it out, to spread the word. We are evangelists, as we are today on Pentecost, that we've hopefully got the Spirit, that the Spirit has descended upon our group to go out and spread the word.
This is a great note to end on. There will be more presentations, webinars, panel discussions from Oxia Women in the near future. If you want to learn more and keep on top of things, if you go to our website, you can sign up for our newsletter, keep on, track us on Facebook, track us on Instagram. Anyway, we hope to see you again, and thank you so much for coming tonight. And Teva, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.